Now that we have an overview of educational psychology and what it entails, we'll look at the historical development of educational psychology as a discipline and understand exactly what the various evolutions and changes that have occurred over the years and how it has affected the way in which we understand educational psychology today. Okay, so let's look back at Unit 1. What did we talk about when we spoke about what educational psychology is? So we said it's about the study of learners, about their learning process, and about the teaching process. We talked about the fact that it takes into account learning differences and preferences. What are learners' areas of strength? What are the areas of growth? How do they learn best? What are the kind of situations that allow them to express themselves most effectively? It also looks at the process of learning from birth and then of course till the end of life. So that involves everything such as when they should be able to walk, when they should be able to talk. Not that these have particular dates to them, but just a general understanding of when this should be occurring. Related to that, it's also concerned the development of milestones in the human experience. So what stages we'll be going through as human beings, how they'll affect the way that we interact with the world and the way in which the world sees and of course responds to us as well. It is a field of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. What does that mean? It's about over years, decades, centuries as well, the passing down of wisdom, the passing down of learning, and how that then gets, how that accumulation of knowledge, accumulation of wisdom, how that plays out in the school space. Oftentimes you'll hear people say, we do it this way because it works, and oftentimes that is grounded in the fact that it's been done that way for many, many years because of a specific type of wisdom or specific reason that has been found over the years to work. So that sounds quite confusing, but let me give you an example. An example of this would be having children doing things as opposed to expecting them just to read from a textbook. Because what accumulated knowledge and wisdom would have shown us and told us is that if children or people are actually experientially involved in their learning, if they are hands-on, if they're getting involved, they're doing rather than just reading about something, they are more inclined to remember, understand, and internalize. Reading and memorization is what people do they do it towards learning for a test or an assessment, to complete an assessment. But understanding, really understanding and delving into a topic is going to be more useful in terms of internalizing the knowledge. Okay, so that's an example there. And then of course it also looks at how we can best meet the needs and areas of strength of our students. So how do we help them reach their potential? How do we support them in gaining a specific skill set that they are most inclined to? So that's a roundabout what we've talked about so far with regards to educational psychology. As you read the journal articles, you're going to start creating a lot more of this definition, as I said in the first video. And also add a lot of other elements to this that supports educational psychology as a discipline. So as you've been reading the journal articles and going through the previous videos, you may have in your mind started thinking about what the aims of educational psychology are. Through my own research, through my own process of learning, I've identified not only the aims that are in the literature, but also aims that I think are important for us as a country, and that we as or you as teachers or aspiring teachers should be cognizant of and should be aspiring to. And so, what are those? I would say education psychology is about being transformative. We have a great movement towards transformation. We are a country that is transforming every day. And part of what the work that we do is transformative as well, is helping students, teachers, schools, communities move from one state of being to another. And of course, that entails a whole lot of other elements such as empowerment, etc. But I think transformation is an important element and aim of the field. Also to be inclusive. And so inclusion is an important element of educational psychology as well, is to ensure that every learner, every individual is met at their skill level and at their need level. We also want to be contextually and socially relevant. We do not want to work from a framework that is applicable to European or American systems, but rather one that is relevant to our South African context. We want to promote lifelong learning. Learning should not end when school ends, but rather it should be a process that continues throughout a person's life. We also want to be collaborative. We do not want to be in a situation where we exclude others, where we compete with others, but rather we find our strength in working together, in collaborating, in sharing the knowledges that people have acquired over years. And that leads to the next point, which is accumulated knowledge and wisdom is both within the discipline as well as within the people within the field. We also want to honor individuality, respect difference and uniqueness, and these two go quite closely together. We respect uniqueness and differences, but not only that, we also honor individuals, honor how, and so we honor how different they are and how they choose to express that difference. Then, of course, all of this and a lot more is part of promoting a democratic society. It's part of redress. It's part of considering our context, considering what is socially important and socially relevant, and including all of this in working towards a society that allows for the voice of all to be heard. And so for teachers, educational psychology, as we've said before, is about helping to develop an educated gut, understanding as teachers what is quote unquote normal, what is something to be expected, and what is something that we have to be conscious of. And that is really how your educated gut gets developed. And then, of course, guidance on establishing relevant assessment norms. How do we assess learners? Are we assessing them at the level that is most appropriate to them? Or are we assessing them at the level that is just something we found in the book? So that's part of what our aim should be as well. And then, of course, to help create a social emotional climate that is conducive to the process of learning. We don't just expect our students to come and be robots and learn, but we know how to create the environment, to support the environment, and foster environment which allows our students to express themselves emotionally and socially as well. So we're going to now move. This was just a brief looking back really at what we've covered thus far. Now we're going to look forward while looking backward, because we'll be looking at the development of the field over many years, and actually centuries. We won't be looking that far back, but we will be touching on how far educational psychology has come, but how part of our ancestral lines and our heritage and our histories this field really is. It may not have been given the name educational psychology at the point at which it's first originated, but it's always been part of societies in some form or another. And we'll talk about that as we go through this slideshow. So, as part of the journal articles that have been uploaded to the Moodle platform for Unit 2, there'll be a document called the 100-Year Journey. It's very important that you read this at the beginning of this unit, as it gives you an outline of how educational psychology began, or what the assumed beginnings were or have been. Then it takes us through a very good journey, looking at the various theorists, their contribution towards the field. It's extremely interesting to see, and very important for you going forward towards your assessments, to look at the theorists and their contribution, and how their findings and their suggestions have today still great relevance, and some of them have made extremely important suggestions that have been lost over the years, and today we're finding that those suggestions that they've made decades ago are coming back and coming out, or emerging as quite relevant to the field and relevant to the way in which our learners are needing to learn in today's world. So please have a very good read on that journal article. It's important that you understand the various components of the development of educational psychology, and who has contributed to the field, and in which way that contribution has affected the way we approach education today. Okay, so understanding the history of the field allows us unique insights about why we do what we do. And so it looks at why we assess in the way that we assess, why we teach in the way we assess. And so these are important identifiers for us in our personal journey. We also want to look at theorists that we're not necessarily going to talk about in this slideshow. We'll be talking about various theorists and their contributions a little bit throughout the slideshow, but there's also contributors like Vives, Rice, quintillion. Apologies, we have a comma missing there. I'm actually using the video to put the comma in. So Vives, Rice, quintillion, if I'm saying his name correctly, they've made great contributions to the field as well. So you need to take some time to read about their contributions and how to fix learning today. And then lastly, we're going to look at, and we need to be aware of how indications of the field are found in religions, in ancient civilizations and societies. We may not have identified the practices of educational psychology or the way in which education is thought about as educational psychology, but if we really investigate the processes, we'll understand that it's always been something that's been around in some form or another. If we think about how we've seen this in our world and how we've understood educational psychology without knowing that that's what the field was called, for centuries people have been reflecting on how teaching and learning has been taking place and how each child is actually responding to it according to their personal preferences. This has always been part of our history. You can teach a child the same lesson, but they will approach it, understand it, and internalize it or not in their own way, depending on their preference and the way in which they best learn. So it's really how we've influenced students in terms of their learning, but also how their preferences have an effect on their learning as well. Okay, so I just wanted to add that before we jump into talking about the theorists in more specificality. So the first stop on our journey will be ancient India. I want to say that India is not the first ancient civilization or the only ancient civilization that we can look to when talking about education, the history of educational psychology. That's the first thing I want to say. The reason we're talking about India is because there does seem to be a little bit more information around it. But if you look, for example, at the journal article you've read on the 100-year journey, they also reference an example in the Jewish religion in terms of the Passover process and how that works, and how that too has an element and is historically what educational psychology is about. So we're just starting at India, but we need to remember it's not the only civilization that we can consider as being the foundations of modern day educational psychology. So historically, ancient Indian teachers applied some psychological principles when they were teaching younger children, so children from the preschool age to adolescence. And so they kept in mind that there was various developmental stages which we know and which we also work with today. And also, besides that, there was specific characteristic features and there was a specific attachment of importance to various emotions in learning. And these were stimulated by external stimulus through sense perceptions. And so that is how they understood learning and how they used the principles of educational psychology to improve the learning process for their students. They also recognize the role of sense perceptions in learning and teaching, and believe that the optical sense, which is your eyesight, the auditory sense, which is your hearing, the tactile sense, the touching, the gustatory and olfactory senses, are the gateways of knowledge. Besides sense perception, imaginations, according to educational psychology in ancient India, also played a vital role in the acquisition of knowledge. So we think about that. They talk about senses, the senses being important. They talk about sense perception and imagination playing an essential and vital role in the acquisition of knowledge. If we think about today's classrooms, they really do deprive your senses. Sometimes they can be quite grey and dowdy and really only work with students that are going to be listening to the teacher or reading from the board. They don't really indulge the senses and engage the senses in such a way that it's exciting for students to learn. So we have to also remember that senses are connected to memory. And so if we connect a memory with a sense such as smell, for example, because smell, the olfactory glands in our noses, and the sense of smell is the strongest indicator, and indicator is the wrong word that I'm using here, but it's the strongest sense that is connected to memory. So if you see something, you hear something, it might give you a memory, but the sense of smell is the biggest contributor to people remembering or having a memory of something. That's important for us to remember.